When the surgeons opened her up, they didn't find a tumor. They found a body, with hair, teeth, a tiny clenched hand. That was the moment Dr. Ravi froze. His legs gave out. The R went silent. What they uncovered inside 11-year-old Anya would defy science and awaken something far older, something ancient, waiting, watching. This is not a story about medicine. It's a story about memory, mystery, and a bond that refused to die. Subscribe now to hear the full journey, because some stories don't end. They echo. The lights in the operating theater hummed faintly, casting a sterile glow over polished steel and pale skin. Monitors pulsed with quiet precision, tracking the fragile rhythm of a young girl's heartbeat. Dr. Ravi stood still, eyes locked on the backlit CT scans before him. His fingers, gloved and steady, trembled ever so slightly. He had seen many things in his years as a pediatric surgeon, but not this. Not what was inside her. The scans had come through just hours earlier. An 11-year-old girl, with abdominal distension growing more severe by the day. A suspected tumor, likely ovarian, possibly teratomatus, was the assumption on intake. Standard protocol. But what the images revealed had nothing standard about it. Within the girl's distended belly lay a form. It was no formless mass or amorphous cyst. No, this had shape. It had vertebrae, limbs, calcified bone, a clenched fist the size of a plum, and nestled against the curve of the child's intestine, what appeared to be the remnants of a jaw, teeth still embedded in their bony cradle. The room fell quiet as Ravi pointed it out to the other surgeons on shift. No one spoke. The heartbeat monitor continued its rhythmic beeping, unaware of the growing weight in the air. Fetus in fetu, he had read about it once, years ago, during his residency. A rare and ancient phenomenon. Fewer than 200 cases recorded across all of medical history. A parasitic twin. Not a tumor, but a sibling. One that had failed to develop, consumed in utero by the other. A life absorbed. And now, 11 years later, that silent presence was making itself known. Ravi felt a coldness settle in his chest. Not fear. Something older. He told himself it was the weight of medical responsibility, the need to act. But beneath that rationale, something else stirred. An ache he hadn't named in years. He stepped back from the screen and looked through the glass partition at the girl lying on the table. Anya. Her name was Anya, thin, pale, and still. She looked like she was dreaming. Her small hands rested atop the rise of her belly, where the other form, unmoving and ancient, lay curled in the dark. He thought of the word sister, and the sound of it unnerved him. One of the nurses behind him whispered something. He didn't catch it, but he heard the sharp intake of breath when the scan rotated and the clenched fist became clear, as though the twin was holding on to something, unwilling to let go. He turned back to the screen. It wasn't a tumor, it was a body. And this surgery would be unlike anything Ravi had ever done. Not just a matter of medicine, but something more, something he couldn't name yet. But it was waiting. In the village where Anya was born, people still spoke in whispers about the day the rains returned. For nearly a year, the skies had remained dry, the fields cracked, the wells turned bitter, and prayers hung unanswered in the heat-soaked air. But on the morning Sarita went into labor, thunder rolled across the plains. Thick clouds gathered as if summoned. By midday the first drops fell, and by evening the land drank greedily from the heavens. The villagers remembered that day not only for the rain but for the girl who arrived with it, wrapped in wet linens and silence, her eyes opened before her first cry. Anya. They gave her a name that meant grace, though Sarita had chosen it long before the child's birth. After 5 miscarriages, she'd stopped hoping for a child, stopped naming dreams. But something about this pregnancy had felt different, not easier, just inevitable. Like the child was not forming within her but returning. Anya did not wail like other infants. Her cry was soft, reluctant, as though she mourned a place she had left behind. The midwife, an older woman with calloused hands and cloudy eyes, stared long at the baby's face. She sees more than we do, she said, and then never spoke of it again. Sarita raised Anya in a modest home at the edge of the village, where the fields met the forest. From the beginning, the girl was unlike others. She did not babble or fuss. She watched. Her gaze was steady, unnerving even to the elders. It was not wild or fey, but deep, like a memory staring back at you. Children grew to love her. Animals followed her quietly, and even when she sat alone beneath the neem tree, hands in her lap, She seemed accompanied by something unseen. Sarita never called her strange. She called her whole, but there were moments, small and sharp, when she felt it. When Anya would pause mid-play, tilt her head as if listening to someone just beyond hearing. When she drew pictures that made the hair on Sarita's arms rise. Two girls, often side by side or curled into each other, one smiling, the other hidden in shadow. Once, during a summer storm, Anya pressed her palm to the window pane and whispered, "She's here." Sarita didn't ask who. She didn't want to know, but in the quiet of night, she would sometimes place her hand on her daughter's belly as Anya slept, not to feel her breathing but something else, some stillness inside her that pulsed just below awareness. As if Anya was never alone, and maybe, Sarita feared, she had never been. The first drawings were harmless: sunlight, trees, animals with bright eyes, the kind of things children sketch in the hush of afternoon, crayons pressed too hard, lines wobbly with joy. Sarita saved them all, pinned to the walls, tucked in kitchen drawers, slipped between pages of books. She saw them as proof that her daughter was happy. But then came the girls. It started subtly. A second figure in the background, a faint outline beside Anya's self-portraits. At first, Sarita mistook them for imaginary friends, as many children have. But there was something too consistent, too intentional. Two girls, always, one with hair drawn like flowing light, a smile tilted slightly upward. The other, shrouded in charcoal smudges, her features unclear, her arms wrapped around herself or fading into lines that didn't finish. One day, Sarita found a page torn from Anya's notebook. It showed two small figures curled in a round space, almost womb-like. One reached outward, her hand open, grasping. The other curled away, spine arched, eyes closed, body coiled like it was shrinking from touch. Anya had written just one word below the drawing: inside. Sarita stood frozen, holding the page, heart tightening without reason. She wanted to ask what it meant, but couldn't find the words. That week, Anya stopped drawing trees. She stopped coloring in blue skies or rabbits hopping across grass. The pages became darker, lines sharper, almost carved into the paper. Black became her favorite crayon. And always, always, the two girls remained. Sometimes they stood on either side of a river. Sometimes they floated in air. Once, they were trapped in a single body, their faces turned in opposite directions. At night, Sarita could hear her daughter talking softly in her sleep. Not the nonsense of childhood dreams, but conversations, or perhaps one-sided ones. "She doesn't like it when I forget. She gets quiet when Mama's near. She wants to come out." The lines on Sarita's face deepened. She didn't speak of it to neighbors, afraid of what they might say. In the village, whispers had weight, and fear disguised itself as tradition. Already, women looked twice at Anya when passing by the market. Already, one old man muttered, "Two shadows, one body. That's not right." Sarita stayed silent, but within her, a storm gathered. She began to notice things. Anya growing thinner despite eating well. Her eyes more sunken, her skin, sometimes cold to the touch, and her stomach, changing, not the soft curve of a child, but something taut, unnatural. When she asked if Anya was in pain, the girl only said, "She's moving again." And that night, the drawing stopped altogether. Whatever needed to be said had already been drawn. It began with a wince, barely a flicker. Anya flinched while tying her sandal, her fingers pausing mid-motion. Sarita noticed, but said nothing. Children ache sometimes, growing pains, stomach bugs, nothing worth alarming a mother who had already lost too much. But the wince came again the next day, then again, followed by a soft groan as Anya stood from her chair, her hand instinctively drifted to her belly. "Sore?" Sarita asked. Anya hesitated. "Just tight." The mother watched her daughter's hands linger a beat too long, not rubbing, not clutching, just touching, as if acknowledging something that had not been there before. Days passed. The ache remained, deepened. Anya no longer ran through the courtyard or danced barefoot in the grass. She walked slower, more deliberate, arms close to her ribs, and her belly grew. Not a swelling of weight or fullness, but a distension, taut, unnatural, out of rhythm with the rest of her body. She remained thin everywhere else, shoulders narrow, legs bird-like, but her midsection pushed forward, pressing against the cotton of her dresses. Sarita changed her wardrobe, sewed looser hems, told herself it was hormones or something simple and benign, but fear moved through her like smoke under a door, slow at first, then undeniable. In the market, people noticed. Women glanced longer. A fruit vendor murmured behind his stall. Children pointed once, then were hushed by their mothers. Sarita began to feel the shift in how the village looked at them, not with wonder anymore, but with wariness. The whispers came at dusk, when oil lamps were lit and voices softened just enough to hide behind the night. She's cursed. Something unfinished lives in her. Maybe she took another soul before birth. Sarita had heard them all. She said nothing, but her spine stiffened each time. At home, she watched the way Anya curled herself into sleep, legs drawn close, arms wrapped around her middle like a shield. She no longer laughed in her dreams. She didn't speak in her sleep anymore either. She just breathed, shallow and slow. One night, as Sarita bent to tuck a blanket around her daughter, she noticed the fabric over Anya's belly pulsing. Barely, but there. A subtle rise, then fall. Not matching her breath. Something else. She pressed her palm gently, half dreading what she might feel. Beneath the skin, there was tension, firmness, and movement. Not gas, not digestion. Something shifted, slow and deliberate, like a thing stretching in its sleep. Sarita pulled her hand back. She didn't speak of it, not even to her mother. Not yet. Because the moment she gave voice to the fear, it would become real, and she wasn't ready. The neem tree stood at the edge of the property, where the last stones of Sarita's garden met the wild grasses of the open plain. Its trunk was gnarled, its branches wide, its leaves thin as whispers. In the quiet heat of afternoon, Anya often sat beneath it, legs folded, head tilted toward the sky as if listening to something above the rustling leaves. She had loved that tree since she could crawl. Sarita used to find her there, humming to herself, tracing patterns into the dirt. But lately, her silence had taken on a different shape, less peaceful, more pensive. Anya no longer hummed. She sat motionless, gaze unfocused, eyes tracking things only she could see. One evening, as the light dipped golden behind the hills, Sarita called for her daughter from the back door. There was no answer. She stepped outside, her bare feet brushing against the warm stone path, and followed the familiar curve toward the neem. There, in the shadow of the tree, Anya sat still, too still. Her hands rested on her lap. Her head was slightly tilted, ear turned toward the bark, as if it were speaking. Sarita approached slowly. Before she could speak, Anya whispered without turning her head. She talks more here. When the tree breathes, the words hung in the air, heavy and incomprehensible. Sarita knelt beside her, heartbeat unsteady. Who talks, Anya? The other girl, she replied softly. She's not angry, just tired. But she doesn't like being under the ground. Sarita blinked. Under the ground? She says it's cold there, and she forgets her name sometimes. The mother felt the sun leave her skin. The breeze seemed to stop. Anya turned then, slowly, her eyes glassy but calm. I think she was supposed to be born too, but something happened, and now she's waiting, inside me. Sarita wanted to deny it, to brush it away as imagination, a story whispered by shadows. But there was no fear in Anya's voice. No dramatics, only a quiet acceptance. That night, Sarita sat awake long after Anya had gone to sleep, the blankets rising and falling with the child's breath. She thought about her own past, about the pregnancy she never spoke of, the bleeding, the silence, the way the village healer had shaken her head, saying, "Some lives don't come in full, some just pass through." She had grieved, yes, and moved on, or tried to. But now, her daughter whispered to bark and soil. She drew girls with blurred faces. She heard voices where there should be none, and beneath her skin something stirred. Sarita pressed her fingers to her temples. There were stories in the village, old ones, about shadows that clung to the living, about lives that weren't ready to let go. And Anya was listening. It was the kind of afternoon that seemed too still, too quiet, as if the world were holding its breath. Sarita moved through the house in silence, folding laundry with fingers that had memorized every soft edge of her daughter's clothing. The walls, once covered in crayon bright joy, now bore only pale shadows where drawings had been taken down or faded in the sun. Anya hadn't drawn in weeks, not since the whispering began, not since the movement inside her belly had taken on a rhythm that didn't belong to digestion or muscle. It had grown, distinct. That day, while tidying the corner cabinet by Anya's bed, Sarita opened the lowest drawer, one her daughter often kept locked. The key had long been lost, or perhaps hidden, but the lock was old and gave way with a gentle push. Inside was a notebook. It wasn't one Sarita remembered buying. The cover was plain, worn smooth at the edges. Its pages were thick, yellowed with time and something else. She opened it. The drawings were different now. Still rough, childlike in stroke, but more deliberate. No longer were there meadows or rabbits or crooked suns. Page after page showed variations of the same image, a round space, like a womb, or perhaps a sphere. Inside were always two small shapes, children, curled in fetal positions. One was always reaching, one was always retreating. Sometimes they floated like shadows in fluid, other times their tiny spines arched against one another, like magnets flipped the wrong way. Arms folded, limbs crossed, opposites, always tethered. Sarita flipped further. On one page the lines were darker, smudged as if drawn in haste or panic. The two figures were no longer peacefully positioned. One had turned its head fully toward the other, an open hand pressed against the twin's back. The other curled tighter, face hidden, lines drawn with such pressure the paper had torn slightly at the center. Below the image, in Anya's careful script, were the words, "We can't run while inside each other." Sarita closed the book, heart hammering beneath her ribs. This was not pretend, not a child's fantasy. It was something known, felt, held. She pressed her forehead against the edge of the bed. All those years ago, when the bleeding came in the 3rd month, when the pain had doubled her over in the fields, they'd told her the child hadn't formed, that it had passed before becoming anything real. But what if it had? What if it had never truly left? And what if it had waited, quietly, patiently, inside the only body it could find? Sarita held the notebook close, fingers trembling. The pictures weren't just drawings. They were memory. The wind that evening carried the scent of burnt leaves and something metallic, almost like rust, but sharper. Sarita stood at the kitchen window, her hands motionless in the dishwater, eyes fixed on the neem tree where her daughter once sat every afternoon. But today, it stood alone. Anya had stayed inside all day, lying curled on the floor, her back to the world. She hadn't eaten. She hadn't drawn. She hadn't spoken more than 5 words since sunrise. When Sarita finally entered the room, Anya was lying on her side, knees tucked into her chest, arms wrapped around her belly. The light filtering through the curtains made her skin appear translucent, like paper pulled too thin. Her breathing was shallow, not fast, not strained, but as if her body was conserving something. Sarita knelt beside her, brushing a strand of hair from her face. "Are you in pain?" Anya blinked slowly. Then, barely above a whisper, "She's moving again." Sarita felt her chest tighten. "Who?" A pause. Then, "The girl. She turns when I sleep, like she's looking for a way out." Sarita didn't answer. She placed her palm gently on the girl's belly, expecting warmth, softness. But what she felt was resistance, firmness that shouldn't be there, a coiled tension beneath the skin. And then, movement. It wasn't a twitch, it wasn't gas, it was deliberate, slow, like a shifting elbow, a turning spine. Sarita withdrew her hand as if burned. Anya didn't flinch. Her eyes were open now, calm. "She doesn't want to hurt me," she said, "but she's not happy, she doesn't like waiting." That night Sarita couldn't sleep. The fan spun overhead, stirring nothing but anxiety. The notebook lay on the floor beside her bed, still open to the page that had broken her. "We can't run while inside each other." She rose before dawn, bathed quietly, wrapped her daughter in a blanket, and packed a single bag, 2 changes of clothes, Anya's drawing pencils, and the notebook. There was no announcement, no goodbye. She didn't wake her mother, didn't light the lamp before leaving. They walked to the edge of the village where the road curved toward the city. In the early light, Anya stirred in her arms, eyes half open. "Where are we going?" Sarita didn't answer at first. She just held her closer, then softly, "To someone who might understand what lives inside you." Anya nodded once, then laid her head against her mother's shoulder, her voice barely audible. "She's tired, Mama. I think she wants to sleep, but not here, not inside me anymore." Sarita swallowed hard. The road ahead stretched silent and endless, and for the first time the silence felt heavier than fear. The hospital smelled of steel and waiting. It wasn't the sharp scent of antiseptic that struck Sarita first, but the strange stillness, like a space between things, between hope and truth, between silence and the sudden sound of grief. She held Anya close as they passed through the wide glass doors. Fluorescent lights buzzed softly overhead, bathing the hallway in a dull, endless glow. Everything here was clean, too clean, stripped of color, warmth, or story. They had arrived just past noon, after hours on a crowded bus, Anya swaying gently against her mother's chest, silent the entire ride. Sarita had carried her the last few steps to the pediatric wing, arms aching, but unwilling to let go. At the reception desk, a nurse in pale green scrubs looked up. "Referral?" she asked mechanically. Sarita hesitated, then simply said, "My daughter, something's wrong, inside." A pause. Then the woman nodded. "You'll see Dr. Ravi. He's on pediatric intake this week." They were sent to a waiting room lined with cracked plastic chairs and faded posters about hydration, vaccinations, growth charts. Anya sat without speaking, her eyes fixed on a fish tank where no fish swam, just plastic coral and the slow whir of bubbles. Time moved differently here. Minutes stretched like taffy. At last, a name was called, not Anya's, but Sarita's. Her name felt strange in this place, out of place, like an echo from a different world. Dr. Ravi was younger than she expected, early 30s perhaps, clean-shaven, glasses perched low on his nose. He didn't look up right away, just gestured toward the chairs across from his desk. Then he saw Anya, and everything changed. His gaze sharpened, not out of alarm but attention. He looked at her as if she were a puzzle he had seen before in a dream, half solved. "What brings you in?" he asked gently, finally. Sarita hesitated. Her words in her native tongue faltered in this sterile room. "There's something growing in her," she said, voice low. "Not like sickness, not fever, it's something else." Ravi nodded slowly. "We'll start with an exam, some scans." As the nurses led Anya away for initial imaging, Sarita sat frozen in the corner of the examination room. She looked at the white walls, the framed certificates, the diagram of a child's digestive tract hanging like decoration. Here, there were no neem trees, no shadows that whispered, just machines, metal, and men who tried to name the unnameable. But deep inside she knew. What they would find wasn't just tissue, it was something older, something patient, and it had waited long enough. The images came through in black and white, grainy at first, then sharper as the technician adjusted the contrast. On the screen, Anya's body emerged in cross-section, layer by layer, organ by organ, until something unexpected broke the familiar rhythm. Dr. Ravi leaned in, his brow furrowing. At first, he thought it was a technical artifact, a glitch perhaps, a doubling of an image from movement. But the lines were too clear, too precise. He magnified the frame. There, curled within the distended cavity of the child's abdomen, was something that should not have been there. A spinal column, not hers, too small, too separate. He froze. Vertebrae, unmistakable, lined up like beads on a thread, a faint curve, imperfect, unfinished. Above it, the soft shape of an upper limb, a hand, tiny. Fingers clenched. He scrolled further. The pelvic angle, a mass near the kidney, oval, dense, with signs of calcification. Within it, a partial mandible, teeth, not imagined, not a shadow. Teeth. He stepped away from the monitor instinctively. A moment later he sat back down, blinked, recentered himself in the chair, as if grounding against disbelief. His mind searched for something that made sense. A teratoma, perhaps? A rare tumor that mimicked human parts, hair, even teeth on occasion. But this had structure, symmetry. This had intention. His hands moved across the keyboard, pulling the next scan, the cross-sectional CT. What emerged confirmed what he didn't want to say aloud. There were two skeletons in the same body. One complete, one partial, one living, one silent. He typed without thinking possible fetus in fetu, then stopped, erased the word possible. It was rare, obscenely rare. Fewer than 200 documented cases in the history of medicine. A parasitic twin, absorbed during gestation, incorporated into the surviving sibling's body, resting there for years like a secret, folded into the soft dark of the abdomen. He had read about it once, years ago. A case in Thailand, another in rural Brazil, all obscure, theoretical. Nothing he had ever seen, nothing he had expected to find in a thin girl with watchful eyes and silence in her breath. Ravi turned his gaze toward the glass panel separating the scan room from the hallway. Through it, he saw her, Anya, sitting on the edge of the exam bed, legs swinging, her face unreadable, but alert. She looked not afraid, but aware. He wondered, irrationally, if she had known all along. Known that something had been living inside her, not a tumor, not an illness, but something once meant to be someone. He printed the scan, fingers shaking just slightly. Whatever this was, it was no longer theoretical. It had a spine, a hand, and maybe a history. The term sat heavy on the page, fetus in fetu. It looked clinical in print, harmless almost. just 2 Latin words buried in the sterile folds of a rare case report. But in Ravi's mind, it echoed like something ancient, something older than diagnosis. He sat alone in the hospital's research alcove, the hum of the fluorescent lighting overhead steady but intrusive. On the screen in front of him glowed the article titles, isolated instances, scattered across time and geography, each no more than a footnote in the vast architecture of medical literature. Yet the details, they chilled. The accounts were precise, emotionless: a young boy in Nepal with abdominal swelling, a teenage girl in Nigeria misdiagnosed with a teratoma, a newborn in rural China who died before doctors could even name what they had found. All cases ended the same way: discovery, removal, recovery, or not. But Ravi read between the lines. He noticed the patterns others had overlooked or ignored. Children who spoke of imaginary siblings, nightmares before diagnosis, drawings, the kind of details that never made it into scientific abstracts, but lingered in the margins of interviews and field notes. And then there was the physical evidence. In nearly every case, the parasitic twin had some semblance of formation, not a complete body, but something close enough to unsettle: spine, limbs, sometimes even hair, teeth, and hands. Always the hands, curled, fused, clenched. He thought of Anya's scan, the small, perfect arc of fingers, folded inwards as if gripping something unseen, or unwilling to release. Fetus in fetu was, medically speaking, the result of aberrant twinning. One embryo absorbs the other early in utero, incorporating it into its own body. The absorbed twin becomes parasitic, feeding off the host's blood supply, incapable of surviving on its own, yet persistent. Not alive, not dead. Ravi leaned back in his chair. He had no words for what he felt. This wasn't awe, nor was it revulsion. It was something in between, a reverence laced with quiet disquiet. He remembered the look in Anya's eyes that morning, steady, knowing, like she'd seen this moment long before he had. Most surgeons would treat this like any mass, a thing to be removed, to be cut out and studied and documented. But Ravi wasn't most surgeons. He had lost a sister once, in surgery, a mistake that haunted the folds of his memory like a scar you no longer feel but still remember the shape of. And now before him was another sister, not his, but someone's, a presence folded into a child's body, patient and silent. And if the stories in the margins held even a grain of truth, this wasn't just a case. This was something waiting to be understood. The hospital room was still, except for the rhythmic beeping of monitors and the gentle rise and fall of Anya's chest beneath a pale cotton sheet. The window was open just slightly, letting in the hum of the city beyond, unfamiliar sounds that did not belong to her village, nor to the girl lying motionless in the bed. Sarita sat beside her, one hand resting lightly over Anya's. She had barely moved since they'd arrived. She'd eaten little, slept less. Her eyes, raw with sleeplessness, traced every movement her daughter made, every twitch, every breath, every flicker of the eyelids. That morning, Anya stirred. Not sharply, not suddenly. Just a shift in weight, a turning of the head, like a sleeper leaning into a dream. Her lips parted slightly, dry and pale. Sarita leaned in, brushing the damp hair from her daughter's forehead. "Mama." It was the first word she'd said since the scans. Sarita nodded, her throat tightening. "I'm here, love." Anya's eyes fluttered, unfocused but open. She didn't look directly at her mother but past her, somewhere distant. "She's just like me," she whispered. The words were soft but clear. Sarita froze. "Who is?" Anya blinked slowly. "The girl. Inside. She's small, but she's quiet, like me." There was no fear in her voice, no confusion, just recognition. "She dreams too," Anya said. "Only hers are darker." Sarita felt her breath catch. She wanted to deny it, to pull her child into her arms and hush these words away. But something about the calm in Anya's tone, the peace in her body, stilled her. "She doesn't speak loud," Anya continued, "but sometimes I can feel her crying. Not loud, the kind that stays inside." Tears welled in Sarita's eyes before she realized they were coming. "She's lonely," Anya said. "She thinks I don't know she's there, but I do. I've always known." Sarita placed her forehead gently against her daughter's hand, unable to speak. This was no medical anomaly, no textbook case. This was something older, something shared. A bond not formed through logic or science, but through silence and presence. Perhaps it was guilt, perhaps it was grief unspoken, perhaps it was something deeper still. But in that moment Sarita believed her. Not because she understood, but because a mother always knows when a child speaks truth. And Anya's truth came not from fear, but love, a quiet love, the kind that recognizes what others cannot see. A twin, not in life, but in longing. And for the first time, Sarita did not wonder what the doctors would find. She already knew there was someone else, and that someone had been waiting too. The night fell heavy. The city beyond the hospital windows had gone quiet, its neon hum muffled by layers of glass and sleep. Inside Anya's room, the only light came from the soft green glow of the monitors and the faint amber from the hallway. Sarita dozed in the reclining chair beside the bed, one hand still draped over her daughter's leg beneath the blanket. Her back ached, her eyes burned, but she dared not close them fully. There was a weight in the room, not oppressive, but dense, like breath held too long. At some hour between midnight and memory, Anya stirred. It wasn't a typical turn in sleep. Her body tensed, arched slightly, then fell still again. Her breath quickened, lips parting. Sarita sat upright, heart suddenly thudding. Anya's head jerked to the side, her face contorted in a grimace, eyes closed but moving rapidly beneath the lids. Then her lips moved, a whisper, hoarse, urgent. "Don't move her." Sarita froze. "Anya, she doesn't like it," the girl murmured, voice tight, strained, almost foreign. "Don't move her." Sarita stood, reaching toward her, instinct overriding logic. But before her hand touched the girl's arm, Anya's body jerked again, and her voice came louder, still not shouting, but clear, "Don't touch her." And then silence. The monitors continued their rhythm. The hallway outside remained quiet. But the air inside the room shifted. Sarita couldn't explain it. A sudden stillness, as if the walls were listening, as if the space around the bed had become occupied. The temperature had not dropped, but Sarita shivered. The fine hairs on her neck stood on end, as though a presence had passed too close without being seen. She looked down at her daughter. Anya's face had relaxed again, the tension gone. Her breathing returned to its soft rhythm, but her hands were clenched into small fists beneath the blanket. Sarita slowly backed away from the bed. She sat in the chair again, not reclining, not resting, only watching. She pulled her shawl tighter, but it wasn't warmth she was missing, it was certainty. She tried to explain it to herself. Night terrors, fever dreams, the stress of the scans, the strange things whispered by doctors. But none of that explained the gravity she had felt. None of it explained why, in that moment, her body had responded not as a skeptic, but as a believer. Something was there, not seen, not measured, but real. And whoever she was, whatever she did not want to be touched. Not yet. Sleep did not return. Sarita sat in the glow of the corridor light filtering beneath the door, eyes fixed on the faint curve of Anya's body beneath the blanket. The child hadn't moved since her whispered warning hours ago. Her breathing had steadied, but something in the room hadn't lifted. It remained, like smoke after fire. Invisible, but unmistakable. Sarita didn't try to explain it anymore. She simply accepted it, like rain after a dry spell. Unexpected but inevitable. She sat there, still, and her mind began to drift. Not toward medicine or logic or the memory of doctors' words, but back, farther back, to her childhood, to the warm, cracked floors of her grandmother's house, where stories drifted like incense in the night air. There was one tale in particular, one she had forgotten until now. It wasn't written down, just whispered during storms or when a child had a fever and couldn't sleep. A story about twins, not born side by side, but entangled within one another. The villagers called them soul twins. Not siblings, but mirrors. It was said that sometimes during the forming of life a soul would divide, not cleanly, not evenly, but jagged and reluctant. The stronger would grow, the other would wait, hidden, quiet, clinging to the first like a shadow beneath skin. And if the host child survived, the other remained. Not dead, not alive, just present, bound. The grandmother had said, "They stay quiet if they are named. If they are loved, they sleep. But if they are forgotten, they grow restless." Sarita had laughed at the time, rolling her eyes at what she thought were stories meant to scare children into sleeping through the night. But now, she looked at Anya and remembered the drawings, the clenched hand, the turning in sleep, the way she sometimes tilted her head as though listening for something just beyond hearing. She remembered the words, "She's just like me," and the drawing in the notebook, two girls in the same space, one reaching, one curled away. What if this wasn't a fable? What if it wasn't a metaphor? What if the old women in the village had always known something that science hadn't yet learned how to name? She pressed her fingers gently together, as if feeling for the heartbeat of memory itself. Maybe Anya's condition wasn't a curse. Maybe it was a reunion of something once whole, then torn, then returned. Sarita looked back at her daughter and whispered softly into the room, not knowing if she was heard. "I see her now." And somehow the silence that followed felt lighter. The conference room was small, windowless, and too white. A rectangular table divided it like a scar, clean and impersonal. Charts were spread across the surface. CT scans, MRI results, handwritten notes, and printed copies of obscure medical journals. Sarita sat at the edge of the table, hands folded so tightly her knuckles blanched. She wasn't used to rooms like this, rooms where words were chosen carefully, where truth was measured in statistics. Across from her, Dr. Ravi sat, flanked by two other physicians, one older with a weary posture, and the other young, sharp-eyed, still carrying the energy of textbooks and certainty. Ravi cleared his throat. His voice, when it came, was calm, kind, practiced. "We've reviewed everything," he said. "The growth inside your daughter. It's not a tumor. It has vertebrae, limbs, rudimentary organs. We believe it to be a case of fetus in fetu." Sarita nodded slowly, though the words rang like a distant bell. She had heard them before. And still, they didn't quite settle. "We've only seen a few dozen verified cases," he continued, "and most involve surgical removal. The mass is not sentient, it's non-viable tissue, but it's grown. It's putting pressure on her internal organs. That's why she's in pain, why she's weakening." The older doctor leaned forward slightly. "Left alone, it will begin to compromise her liver, kidneys, even her heart. The decision is urgent." Sarita looked down at the scan again. The shape was unmistakable now, curled like a child sleeping, but wrong. Bones without symmetry, limbs without direction, and the hand clenched so tightly it seemed sculpted from tension. "We have to remove it," Ravi said gently. The words hung in the air. Sarita swallowed hard. Will it hurt her?" "We'll do everything to protect her," he replied. "But yes, there are risks. Blood loss, infection, even," he paused. She already knew. "Death." The word didn't need to be said aloud. It hovered there anyway. She looked up slowly, her voice barely audible. "And what if it's not just tissue?" No one responded at first. The young doctor adjusted his notes. The older one exhaled through his nose. Only Ravi met her eyes. "We can't speak to anything beyond biology," he said. "But I can tell you this, whatever it is, it's hurting her. And we have a chance to free her from it." Sarita sat back, fingers trembling. In the silence that followed, a thought rose from some hidden place within her. What if it wasn't just inside Anya? What if it was a part of her? She looked at the scan again, at the shadow of a spine curled against her daughter's light. Then slowly, quietly, she whispered, more to herself than to them, "If I say yes, will she come back to me?" Night came without invitation. The corridor lights dimmed. Machines clicked into lower rhythms. The world outside faded behind the drawn hospital curtains, and in the stillness, only the soft hum of breath and beeping remained. Sarita hadn't moved in hours. She sat with her hand resting lightly on Anya's arm, her thumb brushing against the tender skin just above the wrist. It was a gesture she had done since her daughter was a baby, something between protection and prayer. Anya had been quiet all evening, not asleep, not fully awake, drifting, hovering between presence and somewhere else. The consent forms had been signed, the surgery scheduled for sunrise. There was nothing left to do, and yet Sarita couldn't stop watching her. She studied every detail of Anya's face, the slight part in her lips, the soft furrow between her brows, the delicate shape of her eyelashes against pale skin. She tried to memorize her, though she hated herself for the impulse, as if a mother could forget, as if this might be the last night she held her daughter's hand. Outside, a wind picked up. She could hear it push gently against the window pane, rattling the glass like a breath trying to enter. And then, Anya stirred. She didn't open her eyes, but her lips moved. A whisper, shaped by sleep but carrying clarity. "She's not angry." Sarita leaned closer, her heart catching mid-beat. "She's just tired," Anya murmured. "So tired." Silence. Then, after a moment, "She wants to rest." "That's all." Sarita felt a chill crawl across her arms. Not from fear, but something else. A knowing. This wasn't a hallucination, not a fever dream. It was a farewell, not dramatic, not desperate, just quiet. Anya's chest rose and fell. Her fingers twitched once beneath the blanket. Then she whispered again, barely audible. She said, "Thank you." Sarita pressed her lips to her daughter's forehead, letting her tears fall silently onto the bridge of Anya's nose. There was nothing to say, nothing to answer, just presence, just love. She stayed like that for hours, watching, weeping, remembering. Not the hospital, not the scans, but the way Anya had once laughed in the rain. The way she had sung to the neem tree. The way she had always seemed to carry more than just her own heart. Now one of those hearts was letting go, and Sarita could only bear witness, not as a woman of science, not as someone who believed in ghosts or spirits, but as a mother, one who finally understood that some goodbyes are so quiet, you don't hear them until they're already gone. The morning light had not yet arrived, but the hospital room was no longer dark. A faint glow came from the corner, soft and blue, the kind of light that doesn't illuminate, only suggests. The world outside the window remained unseen, veiled behind drawn curtains, but inside time had paused, holding its breath before the day would begin. Sarita sat up, stiff from the long night, her shawl draped over her shoulders like armor. She looked toward Anya's bed, expecting her daughter to still be asleep. But the child was awake. She wasn't sitting, nor speaking, only holding something gently on her lap, a sketchbook, the same one Sarita had packed, though she didn't remember ever handing it to her. Anya had drawn, not with many colors, just two, charcoal black and a soft blue-gray pencil worn down to its final inch. The picture was simple, but it undid Sarita. Two girls stood on opposite banks of a river. One, familiar, radiant in outline, was facing forward, her eyes closed, a small smile resting on her lips. Her hands were at her sides, open, accepting. The other was turned slightly away. Not in fear, but in departure. Her body faded at the edges, her feet barely touching the earth beneath her. She was already becoming something else. Mist, wind, memory. Between them, the river shimmered, not turbulent, not still. Flowing, quiet, inevitable. Sarita looked at the drawing and felt something tighten in her chest. Not panic, not even sadness, but a release. A soft knowing. She turned to Anya, who had not spoken yet. The child's face was calm, eyes half closed, as if still somewhere between here and there. Sarita reached out, touched her daughter's hand. It was warm, solid. "Present." "She's not coming back," Anya said softly. "But that's okay." Sarita nodded. Words would not serve here. Anya blinked slowly, then whispered, "She was never angry, just lost." Sarita felt tears form again, but she didn't brush them away. She let them fall, quiet and sacred. This was a moment beyond comfort, beyond explanation. This was something only a mother and daughter could understand. A farewell without resentment, a bond dissolving with grace. She looked at the picture once more and gently traced the curve of the river with her fingertip. Two girls, two paths, one choice, the choice to let go. Anya leaned back against the pillow, her eyelids growing heavy. "She said the water doesn't hurt," she murmured. "It's like flying, but softer." Sarita kissed her temple. "Then let her fly, my love." And as the first light of day slipped through the gap in the curtains, Anya closed her eyes. The river flowed on. The scrub room smelled of antiseptic and steel. Dr. Ravi stood in front of the sink, sleeves rolled up, hands held aloft as water streamed over them in disciplined rhythm. Lather, rinse, repeat. It was a ritual as much as it was a routine, a ceremony of precision, of control, of belief that if one moved with enough care, the chaos could be managed. But today, the ritual felt different. He could feel it in the air, the weight of something unseen pressing against his shoulders. Not superstition, not fear, something older. A sense that the room he stood in was no longer entirely his. He glanced to the tray beside him. The surgical tools were lined up in immaculate rows. Scalpels, clamps, suction tips, forceps, gleaming like instruments of both healing and judgment. Behind him, the OR was being prepared. Nurses murmured in hushed tones. Anesthesiology readied the cocktail that would carry Anya into stillness. And Ravi stood alone, heart thudding beneath layers of blue cotton and protocol. He remembered his sister. Not often. Not like this. Years ago, she'd gone under the knife. A tumor, they'd said. Routine. Expected. But she never came back. He had not been the surgeon then, just a boy in a waiting room. But the silence that followed had never quite left him. That day, he had vowed to become the one who stood behind the mask, not to conquer death, but to understand it. to meet it eye to eye, and if nothing else, ask it to wait. Now, here he was. And this wasn't a tumor. This was something else. Something that blurred the lines between medicine and myth. He had read the scans, memorized the anatomy. He knew where to cut, what to separate, what to preserve. The parasitic twin was entwined with Anya's bloodstream, but not attached to vital organs. It could be removed, safely, mostly. And yet, he remembered the hand, the tiny clenched fist. Not random tissue, not chaos, structure, intention. What does it mean, he thought, when a mass looks back at you, not with eyes, but with silence? He turned to the mirror above the sink. His face stared back, pale beneath the surgical cap. He whispered, to no one in particular, let this be enough. Behind the door, the team was waiting. Sarita was waiting. And somewhere inside that small girl's body, someone else had already begun to let go. He dried his hands, slipped on the gloves, and stepped toward the threshold. One breath, one step. Not just a surgery. A release. And in the quiet between scrub room and operating table, he understood. Today wasn't about removing what didn't belong. It was about helping someone finally leave. The operating room fell into silence. The kind of silence not born from absence, but from focus, from breath held across a dozen bodies waiting for one to lead. Doctor. Ravi stood at the head of the table, gloved hands hovering over the small form beneath the sterile drapes. Anya lay still, her face half covered by a mask, her chest rising in shallow rhythmic lifts. The monitors beeped steadily, the only sound in the room aside from the occasional soft murmur of a nurse confirming vital signs. Ravi's voice broke the hush, low and calm. We begin. A nurse handed him the scalpel, cool, familiar, unforgiving. He didn't rush. He never did. The blade met skin just above the center of Anya's swollen abdomen, taut and stretched from within by the unseen shape. He made the first incision with the care of someone turning a page in an ancient manuscript. The skin parted, then the subcutaneous tissue, then muscle, layer by layer, like opening a secret that had waited too long to be known. As they went deeper, Ravi's heart beat faster, not with panic, but anticipation. The scans had prepared him for anatomy, but not for this moment, not for what would be revealed when science gave way to something else. He paused. A fine membrane shimmered beneath the lights, translucent, pearlescent. The sac. Retractors, he said. The team responded without question. Metal arms gently pulled back tissue. Ravi lifted the membrane, exposing the contents within, and then they saw it. No one spoke. Inside was not a mass, not a tumor. It was a body, incomplete, yet unmistakably human. Curled like an infant in sleep, but distorted, spine twisted, legs bent sharply, skin mottled and thin. A patch of dark, wiry hair clung to the skull-like shape. One arm rested across the chest, the other clenched. That hand again, so small, so tightly closed it seemed to have been frozen that way. Ravi's breath caught. It had fingernails, translucent, tiny, 5. Fetus in fetu confirmed, he said, more to the record than to the team, but his voice trembled slightly. He motioned to the surgical nurse. Clamp vascular attachments. Begin isolation. As the team worked, Ravi's eyes remained on the face. Not formed enough to resemble anyone, but not empty either. He had performed hundreds of procedures, seen things most doctors would never face. But this felt like stepping into a cathedral, like unthreading something sacred from flesh. He moved slowly, delicately, separating the twin from Anya's body, blood vessels, tissue adhesions, bone fragments. When the last tether was released, he lifted it free. It weighed almost nothing, but it carried everything. He laid it on the tray, and though no one in the room believed in ghosts, no one spoke for a long, long time. The room should have exhaled. The mass had been removed. The parasitic twin lay in the surgical tray, coiled like a secret finally told. Ravi had closed the final adhesion, and for a moment, everything felt still. A nurse called out, "Vitals steady." Ravi nodded. Closing in layers, the tension that had gripped the operating room slowly began to ease. The air no longer held its breath. Hands moved more fluidly. Even the fluorescent lights above seemed to touch warmer. And then, it happened. Beep, beep. The monitor changed. Beep. Then, flatline. A single long tone sliced through the room like a scream that had no mouth. "Cardiac arrest," the anesthesiologist shouted. The stillness shattered. "Starting compressions," the nurse said, already on the move. Hands pressed into Anya's tiny chest. Ravi's hands froze mid-suture, blood still on his gloves. For a fraction of a second, no more than the blink of an eye, he was that boy again, in the waiting room, waiting for a sister who never came back. Not again. Epinephrine, he barked. The syringe was handed off with practiced speed, a sharp push into the 4-line. Still no heartbeat. The nurse counted, voice steady. 1, 2, 3. Charge defibrillator, Ravi said. 150 joules. The machine beeped back. Clear. Anya's body jumped under the shock, small and sudden like a breath trying to return. Silence. Still flatline. The room, full of movement, now felt like it had stopped spinning. A second shock. Nothing. A third. Nothing. Ravi stepped forward, knelt beside her, his gloved hand on her forehead. He whispered, not clinically, not professionally, but personally, "Come back, Anya." Another round of compressions. Sweat beaded under surgical caps. The anesthesiologist checked again. No pulse. A nurse whispered, almost involuntarily, "Please," and then, beep. A single small note on the monitor, then another, and another, slow, fragile, but real, a heartbeat. "She's back," the nurse gasped. The tension didn't break. It dissolved, slowly, cautiously. As if the room itself feared believing it too quickly, Ravi exhaled deeply, his eyes closing for the briefest second. The sutures were finished with shaking hands. His voice was quieter now, more reverent than clinical. "Close the field, secure dressing, begin post-op monitoring." There were no cheers, no applause, only quiet, and a shared look between everyone in the room that said, "We almost lost her." Ravi stepped back from the table, his gown stained, his gloves slick, his mind numb, but inside that body a heart was beating again, faint, but stubborn. Anya had returned, and none of them, not even Ravi, would ever quite understand from where. The room was dim, lit only by a single lamp over the recovery bed. Machines still hummed, but more softly now, like lullabies. The worst had passed. For now, Sarita sat beside her daughter, one hand resting gently on Anya's bandaged wrist. The skin beneath was warm again, not burning with fever or stretched from pressure, but warm in the way life is when it returns after stepping too close to the edge. The girl hadn't spoken yet. She hadn't opened her eyes. But she was here, breathing, present, and that, for now, was enough. The nurses had come and gone, their steps light, their voices lowered to whispers. Even they seemed changed, moved by something they couldn't name. They had seen recoveries before, but not like this. On the bedside table, Sarita noticed the sketchbook. It had been placed carefully, perhaps by a nurse. The worn cover curled at the corners. A broken blue pencil sat beside it, barely usable. She picked it up, thumbing through the pages slowly. The drawings grew darker near the middle, images of shadowed girls, twisted trees, rivers that ran without shores. But near the end, something shifted. The last few pages were softer, two girls holding hands, trees bathed in light, stars, and then, a blank page, the final one. No lines, no sketch, just white. She ran her fingers over it, surprised by the ache that rose in her chest. This wasn't absence. It was possibility. A silence that didn't signal the end, but the space where something new could begin. She closed the book gently and placed it back beside Anya. Just then, a soft sound broke the hush. A breath, a murmur. Sarita leaned in quickly. "Anya?" The girl's eyelids fluttered, then opened. Her gaze was unfocused, as if still halfway between two worlds, but she was awake. Her lips moved, dry and hesitant. "Where?" "You're safe," Sarita whispered. "You're here, with me." Anya blinked. Her eyes traveled to the window, where morning light had begun to stretch its fingers across the blinds. Then she turned, just slightly, toward the sketchbook. Her fingers reached for it, weak, trembling, but deliberate. Sarita helped place it into her hands. Anya didn't open it. She just rested her palm on the cover. After a moment she whispered, "It's quiet." Sarita nodded, yes, and then, a faint smile, so small, so fleeting, but real. The child who had once carried another inside her, now held only herself, and a page yet to be written. Outside the city stirred. Day had broken. Inside life waited, not loudly, but fully, and in the breath between what had ended and what would begin, Anya rested. Whole. They returned home on a Wednesday. Not with fanfare, not with noise. Just a borrowed car, a quiet road, and the kind of silence that feels more like reverence than emptiness. Sarita sat beside her daughter in the back seat, her hand resting on the girl's thin knee, feeling the warmth of life humming softly beneath skin and scar. Anya didn't speak much during the drive. She watched the fields pass, eyes tracing the curve of the hills, the leaning fences, the birds riding thermals just above the treetops. She had changed, not in ways that frightened Sarita, but in ways she couldn't quite name. The village came into view, familiar yet distant, a place waiting, not watching. And under the same neem tree where she had once drawn her first pictures, Anya now stepped barefoot into the dirt. The ground was soft from recent rain, earth breathing. Leaves above them rustled with a kind of hush, like even the tree had paused in welcome. Sarita laid out the mattress, just as she used to. A pillow, a blanket, a small tin cup of water. Anya sat slowly, carefully, her back leaning against the sturdy trunk, her eyes closed for a long moment. Then, she smiled. "I miss this tree," she said softly. "It missed you too," Sarita replied. There were no villagers crowding, no questions, just the gentle wind, the scent of damp soil, and the sense that something long unsettled had finally returned to rest. Sarita sat nearby, close enough to feel her daughter's breathing, and then, a sound. Faint, a whisper, so soft it might have been imagined, or dreamt, or remembered. Anya tilted her head slightly, as if listening to something far off. A breeze touched her cheek, and for a brief instant, her lips moved, shaping a word that never fully formed. Not fear, not grief, just recognition. She opened her eyes, calm and clear. "I think," she said, "she's not gone." Sarita looked up. "No? She's just quiet now," Anya continued. "Like, she doesn't need to be heard anymore." The neem leaves trembled above them, casting flickers of light and shade across her face. "She's part of the wind, and the sky, and me." Sarita didn't answer. She simply reached out, and Anya took her hand. The whisper returned, only once more, not a voice, not a word, just the hush of peace settling into a place where something had once clung. And then, the tree stood silent. The world moved forward, and for the first time in a long while, nothing pulled Anya backward. Only onward, only home. The afternoon light slanted low across the courtyard, soft and golden, as if the sun itself had chosen to move more slowly for her. Anya sat cross-legged beneath the neem tree, her hair tied back loosely, a light shawl around her shoulders. A breeze moved through the leaves above, and each time it passed, it seemed to carry a hush, like nature holding its breath for what she might create. Before her lay a new sketchbook, crisp, untouched, a blank canvas, not just of paper, but of possibility. Sarita watched from the steps of the veranda, careful not to intrude. This moment belonged to her daughter alone. Anya held her pencil in thoughtful stillness, then slowly lowered it to the page. No hesitation, no glance back, only forward. The graphite moved in gentle arcs. She didn't press hard, she didn't sketch fast. It was almost meditative, each stroke an offering. The image began to form. Not two girls, not rivers, not shadows, but one girl, standing beneath a tree, barefoot, eyes closed, arms slightly lifted, as if feeling the weight of the sunlight, or perhaps letting it carry her. There was a faint smile on the figure's lips, the kind that wasn't meant for anyone else, just for herself. Around her, the tree's roots curled deep into the earth, and its branches reached beyond the page, beyond the edges of what could be drawn. And above it all, light, not in rays or lines, just suggestion. A warmth drawn in soft strokes, filling the space without crowding it. When she was done, Anya didn't sign it. She didn't date it. She simply looked at it, long enough to see it, to believe it. And then she turned the page, one clean movement. Not to hide it, but to continue. Sarita approached quietly, sitting beside her, their shoulders touching but words unspoken. She glanced down at the drawing, and understood. "This is you," she said softly. Anya nodded. "Where is she?" Sarita asked gently, not needing to clarify who she was. Anya looked at the branches, then at the space above. "She's everywhere now," she whispered, "but I don't need to draw her anymore." Sarita placed a hand over her daughter's. There was no grief in that moment, no pain, just peace. And a quiet knowing that while some absences ache, others heal. Because they make room, because they let go, because they leave behind a space where something new can live. The breeze passed again, the pencil lifted, and Anya began to draw once more. Not a goodbye, not a ghost, just a girl, alive, whole. Here, Sarita found the letter 3 days after they returned home. It had been tucked into the inner fold of Anya's hospital gown, barely noticeable, creased, folded over itself twice, no envelope, no handwriting on the outside, no address. She only noticed it when she went to wash the garment. Her fingers brushed against something paper thin and hidden, like a secret stitched between the threads. She hesitated before unfolding it. The paper was plain, the ink faint and slightly smudged, as if the writer had wept while writing, or written in a hurry, afraid they might change their mind. There was no salutation, just the words. I lost my daughter during childbirth. The doctor said she came alone, but I always knew. She didn't, not really. Sarita froze, her breath caught. They said her twin never developed, that she was absorbed, as if that explained the silence that lived in my daughter's eyes. She lived for only an hour, but even in that hour, I felt the weight of two souls saying goodbye. Sarita's hands trembled as she read. When I heard of your child, of what they found, I wept without knowing why. Then I understood. Your daughter lived, and still, she carried something my child could not just a body, but a bond, a presence. The letter did not ask for attention, did not seek thanks. It was a confession, a connection, a reaching hand across invisible threads. I don't know your name, you don't need to know mine, but I want you to know this. She carried her sister long enough for the world to remember her. And in that she gave something no medicine could measure, room for two hearts to become one. There were no signatures, just a single final line. Sometimes what lives in us is not meant to be removed, only released. Sarita folded the letter slowly, carefully, her throat tight, her chest filled with an ache that was not pain, but recognition. Who had written it? A nurse? A stranger from the waiting room? Someone who had read about Anya's case in the brief ripple of news coverage before the world moved on? It didn't matter. This wasn't a letter that needed a name. It was a quiet echo of her own journey. Anya was drawing in the courtyard again. The neem tree swayed gently above her. Sarita didn't tell her about the letter. Not yet. Some truths don't need to be spoken. They simply need to be held. Later that night, she placed the folded paper between the pages of Anya's sketchbook, pressing it into the spine like a pressed flower, fragile, unseen but preserved. Because sometimes it's not the sender that matters. It's the understanding and the silent grace of being known by someone you'll never meet. The morning light filtered through the kitchen window in golden slats. The house was quiet, still held in that gentle hush that comes just before the world begins to stir. Sarita poured warm milk into 2 clay cups, her movements slow and unrushed. Outside, the leaves of the neem tree swayed gently, casting shifting shadows across the veranda. Anya sat on the step, knees drawn to her chest, blanket around her shoulders. Her sketchbook was closed beside her for once, her pencil untouched. She was staring at nothing and everything. Sarita joined her without a word, offering the cup. They sipped in silence, not the awkward kind, but the kind made sacred by presence. Then, without looking away from the horizon, Anya spoke. She let go, she said simply. Sarita turned to her gently. When? Anya's eyes remained distant, but her voice was clear. In the OR, before the machine started screaming. Before you signed the papers. Before any of it really. She let go. Inside me, Sarita said nothing. There wasn't fear, Anya continued, her words slow, careful, not like in the stories. It was like a sigh. Like when you've been holding your breath too long and finally exhale. The girl blinked, not to hold back tears but to remember. She was tired, not angry, just tired of being in between. She didn't want to hurt me. I don't think she ever did. She just didn't know how to leave. Sarita's hand reached over, covering her daughter's. And when I slept in the hospital, Anya said, voice quieter now, I saw her. A dream? Sarita asked. A place, Anya replied. A kind of field. No sky, no ground, just light. And she was standing there. Not twisted, not small, just a girl, like me. She paused. She smiled, not like someone saying goodbye, but like someone saying thank you. Sarita's throat tightened, but she kept her silence. She didn't want to come with me, Anya whispered. She wanted to go somewhere else, not back, not forward, just away, to rest. Then, for the first time that morning, Anya turned her head and looked at her mother. I think we were both waiting, me to be whole, and her to be free. Sarita nodded. Words would have only gotten in the way. They sat like that for a while longer, mother and daughter, each holding the weight of something no longer inside them. The light grew brighter, the breeze warmed, and in that silence, so full, so alive, Anya smiled. She let go, she repeated, and Sarita knew. So had she. Dr. Ravi stood alone in the hospital chapel. It was late, past visiting hours, past the noise, past the routine. The light from the small stained glass windows spilled onto the floor in colored pools, like echoes of forgotten prayers. He didn't come here often. Not because he didn't believe in anything, but because places like this demanded honesty, and honesty had a way of asking questions he couldn't answer. He sank into the third pew, loosened the collar of his white coat, and looked at his hands. Steady. Still. These hands had removed the twin, had saved Anya, had stitched the final layer of skin with the care of a poet writing his last line. And yet, there was a hollow stillness inside him. Not failure, not regret, but uncertainty. He thought of the scan, the curled form, the tiny clenched hand, thought of the moment the flatline sounded, and how, for those unbearable seconds, all of medicine had gone silent. What had brought her back? The defibrillator? The adrenaline? The compressions? Yes, that was the answer on the form, but not the one that stayed with him at night. He remembered Anya's eyes when she awoke, how calm they were, how old, like she had returned from a place he would never understand. He leaned forward now, elbows on knees, head bowed, not in prayer but in thought. How do you explain the unexplainable? How do you measure something you can't touch? He'd read every journal article on fetus in fetu, understood the biology, the embryology, the rarity. Less than 200 cases in the world, a condition, a curiosity, a medical anomaly. But what he saw in that room wasn't just tissue, it was something more, something neither dead nor alive, but waiting. He exhaled slowly, not out of exhaustion but surrender. Some answers don't live on charts, they live in spaces in between heartbeats, between breaths, between the seen and the sensed. A voice echoed faintly in his memory, she let go. He hadn't been there when Anya said it, but Sarita had told him. Her voice steady, her eyes filled with something deeper than gratitude. Faith? No. Something quieter, understanding. He reached into his pocket, pulled out the folded copy of Anya's final scan. The one with the clenched hand. He stared at it, not as a doctor, not as a scientist, but as a man, and then, slowly, he folded it again, gently this time, and slipped it into the chapel's offering box, not as a record, but as a release. Because sometimes, what we can't explain, we honor, and sometimes, the best answer to a question that haunts us is to stop asking. Anya returned to school quietly. There was no grand announcement, no assembly, just a new uniform, slightly loose on her thinner frame, and her sketchbook tucked safely into her bag. Some classmates stared, others whispered, but no one asked anything directly. Children often carry more grace than adults. They knew something had happened, something big, but they didn't press. Instead, they welcomed her back with paper flowers, a shared desk, and quiet smiles. At recess, she didn't join the games just yet. Her body was still healing, her steps careful, but she sat beneath the same neem tree that had cradled her before, the one just beyond the schoolyard wall, where roots broke the earth in wide arms. She opened her sketchbook and began to draw, not memories, not dreams, but beginnings. A small garden, a wooden swing, a hand reaching for the sun. There were no shadows in the margins, no twisted limbs, no doubled faces, just space, and one girl, whole, alive, becoming. Each afternoon, after the final bell, she returned to that spot. Sarita didn't ask where she went. She already knew. Some days Anya would speak softly to herself as she sketched, not in fear, not in sadness, but in rhythm, like the tree itself was listening. And perhaps it was, because some trees, like some stories, are meant to witness. One afternoon, her teacher approached quietly, watching from a distance. She saw the drawing, Anya standing on a hillside, arms wide, wind lifting her hair like wings. "What are you drawing today?" the teacher asked, gently. Anya looked up and smiled. "Tomorrow," she answered. The teacher nodded and left her to it because some children aren't just students, they are storytellers, and some stories aren't written in books or recited aloud. They're drawn beneath trees, whispered in wind, and lived in quiet bravery. Anya's scar had faded now, just a faint line beneath her blouse, soft as memory. She didn't hide it, but she didn't wear it either. It was just part of her, like her eyes, like her silence, like her voice which had returned, steadier than before. One day, a younger girl approached her beneath the tree, shy, curious. "Did it hurt?" the girl asked. Anya thought for a moment. "Only when I held on too long. Are you better now?" Anya nodded. "I'm becoming." And that was all. The neem tree rustled gently above them, its branches casting lacework shadows onto the soil, and in the space beneath, a girl once split now sat whole, sketching the life she was still discovering. Not a miracle, not a mystery, just a child, drawing tomorrow. The monsoon had passed, leaving behind skies rinsed clean and air sweet with earth. Sarita moved through the house slowly that morning, guided not by duty, but instinct. Something called her, not loudly, not urgently, but with the quiet insistence of memory. She opened the small chest at the foot of Anya's bed. Inside were things only a mother would keep: faded dresses too small to wear, a broken hair clip shaped like a butterfly, crumpled paper flowers from birthdays long gone. Beneath it all, wrapped in soft cloth, was the old sketchbook, the one from before, the one Anya had taken with her to the hospital. Sarita held it close for a moment, unsure whether to open it, but she knew she would. She always had to. She turned the pages gently. They whispered as they passed, soft rustles of graphite, smudged corners, and half-erased lines. The early drawings were familiar, two girls always side by side, one smiling, one shadowed. Sometimes they were curled together like twins in a womb. Sometimes they stood back to back, unable to see each other. The deeper into the sketchbook she went, the more haunting the images became. Until they didn't. Near the end, the lines softened. The shadows thinned. One girl remained, standing, alone, peaceful. Sarita's fingers stilled on the second-to-last page. She remembered this one. The night before the surgery, Anya had drawn it in the dark, with only the glow of the hallway light. A river, wide and still. On one side stood a girl, her hand reaching. On the other, another girl, fading into the trees. Between them, no bridge, just water. And then, the last page. No picture, just words, written in soft slanted pencil strokes. If I don't come back, I'll be in the drawings. Look for the girl who smiles with her eyes closed. Sarita read the line 3 times, then closed the book and held it to her chest. She had always known Anya was different, not because of what was inside her, but because of what she carried so quietly. A child who had prepared for every ending, not out of fear, but love. That line wasn't a farewell, it was a map, a trail of breadcrumbs back to something eternal, something resilient. Sarita rose, carrying the book into the courtyard. Anya was beneath the neem tree again, sketching something new, her lips humming a soft melody, her fingers stained with pencil dust. Sarita didn't interrupt. She simply sat nearby, opening the book in her lap, turning to that final message again. Anya looked up and saw it, and smiled, with her eyes closed, just like the drawing, just like the girl who had always known her way home. That night, the stars came out quietly. No thunderclouds, no breeze, no ceremonial fanfare, just a slow reveal, one light at a time, until the sky unfolded into a canvas dusted with silver. Anya lay on the rooftop, a thin blanket beneath her, arms folded behind her head. The stone was still warm from the day's sun. Beside her sat her sketchbook, unopened for once. This moment wasn't meant for drawing. It was for watching, for remembering, for becoming. Below, Sarita moved about the house in gentle rhythms, tidying a cup, folding clothes, humming softly, a melody she didn't realize Anya had memorized long ago. Up here, the air was thinner, quieter, cleaner. Anya closed her eyes for a moment, breathing in deeply, not because she was tired, but because this was the kind of breath you took when you were entirely your own. She opened her eyes again and stared up at the night. No voice spoke back. No invisible form stirred beside her. There was only space, still, sacred space. And in that space she whispered, "Thank you." She didn't speak it aloud. The words were in her mind, but the sky heard them. Thank you for staying. Thank you for leaving. Thank you for making room. There had been a time when she shared every second of her existence with another, when she'd felt thoughts that weren't hers, dreamed dreams she couldn't name, when she hadn't known where she ended and the other began. But now, under this vast, glittering canopy, she felt only herself. It wasn't lonely, it was infinite. A freedom so wide she could almost float in it. Her hand reached toward the stars, fingers spread. They didn't feel far, they felt familiar, not because she'd been among them, but because, for once, she wasn't sharing them. They belonged to her alone. The silence was not empty, it was full of presence and promise, the kind you carry, not chase. She didn't cry. She didn't need to. Grief had passed. What remained was grace. Somewhere deep inside, where her sister had once lingered, there was only stillness now. A room that had once echoed with footsteps now sat in quiet sunlight. No longer haunted, just remembered and honored. Anya turned on her side, facing the open sky. If you're watching, she thought, I'm here. Then she smiled, a real one, not for anyone else, just for herself. And as the stars blinked quietly in their places, she fell asleep on the rooftop, the blanket tucked beneath her, the sketchbook unopened. Because not every night needs a picture. Some are perfect just as they are. The hospital at night was a world unto itself. The fluorescent lights dimmed, the chatter of visitors long gone. Only the soft wheels of a medication cart echoed down distant halls. Dr. Ravi walked the corridor in silence. He didn't have a reason to stay late, not officially. His rounds were done, his notes submitted. The shift was over hours ago. But still, he stayed. There was something about the quiet that helped him think. Or maybe it helped him feel, something he wasn't trained for in medical school. The pediatric wing smelled faintly of talcum powder and antiseptic. Somewhere down the hallway, a child coughed in sleep. Another cried out in a dream. Nurses moved like shadows, soft-footed and tender-eyed. He paused outside the recovery room that had once been Anya's. It was empty now. Fresh linens, a folded blanket, a faint outline where the bed had been pressed under her weight. He didn't go in, just looked. Then continued walking. Each step echoed more in his head than on the tile. He had performed the surgery, reviewed the scans, issued the prognosis, followed every protocol with precision. But none of that was what stayed with him. What stayed was the sketch, the girl with her eyes closed, smiling, as if she already knew the outcome, as if she had never needed him to fix her, only to help her release what she already understood. He reached the end of the corridor, where a wide window overlooked the city. The skyline blinked in gentle patterns, tower lights, street lamps, distant headlights trailing like slow-moving stars. He leaned against the glass, palms resting on the cool metal rail. A colleague once asked why he stayed in pediatrics, why he chose the fragile and uncertain, the days full of tiny needles and long nights. He hadn't known how to answer. Not until now. It wasn't about saving lives, it was about understanding them, about standing at the edge of mystery and not flinching. Anya had taught him that. Not through words, not even through her drawings, but through her silence, her stillness, her calm defiance of everything he thought he knew. He reached into his coat pocket and pulled out the small note Sarita had given him. She came into this world once, and into herself twice. He read it again, slowly, reverently, then tucked it into the inside cover of his notebook, not as a case file, as a compass, one he would carry into every room from this day forward, not to diagnose faster, but to listen deeper. He stayed by the window until the shift changed. Nurses clocked out. Janitors passed him without comment. The city blinked on. And Dr. Ravi, no longer just a doctor, stood quietly, remembering the child who reminded him that healing isn't always about removing what doesn't belong. Sometimes it's about giving someone permission to become who they already are. The final drawing was quiet, not in its color. Anya had used deep greens, rich blues, strokes of warm gold, but in its feeling. It was a picture of a tree, not just any tree, the neem tree in their courtyard, but fuller, broader. Its branches stretched impossibly wide, curving upward like arms ready to lift the sky, and beneath it stood two girls. Not facing each other, not back to back, side by side, holding hands. One looked outward, eyes wide open, the other, inward, her eyes closed and smiling. They were the same height, same hair, same curved line to the chin, but only one cast a shadow, the other glowed faintly like memory, like light remembered. Anya taped the picture to the inside of her bedroom door, not hidden in a book, not tucked beneath a pillow, but right where she could see it each morning. I want to remember, she said to Sarita, but not carry. Sarita nodded. That was enough. That night after Anya had fallen asleep, Sarita lit a single candle and returned to her journal, the one she had begun the night Anya was born. She hadn't written in it for months, maybe longer, but tonight her hand didn't tremble. She wrote slowly, thoughtfully, no longer recording milestones or medical updates. Just this: she came into this world once and into herself twice. Each time she brought someone with her. And now she is whole. She closed the journal gently, placing it on the table beside Anya's sketchbook. 2 volumes side by side, one written in ink, the other in color. Morning would come, the school bus, the neem tree, the rhythm of living. But for now, the house breathed in stillness. And in that stillness there was peace. Outside, the wind stirred through the leaves, not loudly, just enough to whisper. And maybe, if someone were listening closely, they would hear it say she was never alone, even when her body held more than it should, even when science could not explain, even when her dreams were filled with names no one else had spoken. She was never alone. Because some bonds don't begin with birth. They begin in the space between heartbeat and silence, between seen and unseen, and though they may fade from form, they remain in feeling, in drawings, in songs hummed softly before sleep, in the way a child looks up at the stars and smiles, not because they are bright, but because she knows someone else once watched them too. Now it's your turn, to remember what you've carried, to name what has no name, to honor what left you or lived within you quietly. Not all healing is loud. Some of it is the gentle closing of a notebook, a picture taped to a wall, a story whispered once more before the light is turned off. She was never alone. And neither are you. Some stories are told with words, others with silence. Anya's story wasn't just about what was taken from her, but what was finally set free. Maybe you've carried something too, something you couldn't explain, something no one else could see, a memory, a scar, a shadow, or a bond that never had a name. If this story stirred something in you, leave a comment below. Tell us, what part of you have you quietly carried? What silence have you made peace with? And if you believe more people should hear stories like this, stories that don't just inform but transform, please hit subscribe and turn on the bell icon, because you're not alone, and neither is your story.